What kind of struck me about the synergies between what Rachel and Michelle were drawing upon was, I mean, I wrote things in that the importance of looking at mentoring as a relationship, but as an unfixed relationship, as one that is, at its best, really, and not as that as a negative thing, that there's a certain amount of fluidity about it. And it was interesting, I mean, Michelle coming in with like the theoretical lens, where it was as if we were going to get these, strict parameters of what the thoughts were, was in every way as fluid as some of the experiences that Rachel was touching upon. And that notion that goal setting maybe isn't the objective, but the objective seems to be what was emerging was almost in I was thinking of like a therapist, with someone of an uncovering and of having the ability to think through one's experience with the other person there in that relationship position, to allow them to see or to have a better, be able to put in a different context issues that they might not have seen themselves. So I guess before opening up, one question that I had in looking at this is recognizing then that it seems to be this shifting, fluid relationship that you have to respond to each other. How at the same time can we ensure that mentoring isn't just so open that there isn't any structure to it? So I don't know if Michelle or Rachel, if you maybe had some thoughts about that.
Michelle?
From my point of view, I think that's where you go back to the theories and models that experienced researchers in mentoring have created for that very purpose, because it is a dimension of being fluid, responding to unforeseen, unplanned circumstances, or even what a mentee may come up to say to you at any time, yet not allowing it to be so open and free that one just feels like they're swimming in sort of the Atlantic Ocean and land is never in sight. So I think this is one of the true skills of an effective mentee, is knowing when to let it all just happen, and then knowing when to rein it back in and provide some structure, because we all at any one given time like structure. We like the fluidity, we like the expressiveness, but sometimes we go, yes, but just now put me into the direction. So I think as mentors, it is that real skill, and it's an art of being able to draw on various models to be able to create a personalized framework and an awareness of what your mentee needs and when your mentee needs it.
Yeah, I think even a very practical parameter is the timing of it sometimes. I think the fact that often you try to stick to this year allotted time, and the minimum is 4 meetings, but that can, I mean, with my mentee, often I meet them a little bit more than that. But I think allowing their ideas to merge and then guiding them to firm those up, I think, is really quite key as well. And I think sometimes that structuring of timing in kind of quite the same way that, that when you're making a piece of work or a piece of choreography, that you could spend months and months and months just exploring and finding out and asking more questions and another question and another question. But at some point you've got to kind of draw it together and bring the ideas together. And I think even it's very the parameters of the time frame is a really, really simple device to make people think, okay, how do we bring this together? I think just from a very basic practical level.
Yeah.
Sorry, straight. Am I okay? You don't
Sure.
need microphone.
Yeah, we've got a few minutes.
Just observing from 2 perspectives, because I also do business mentoring.
Right.
And as dancers or creative artists or choreographers, we're so much better placed to handle that fluid process than people that have come from a different kind of learning process. So just observing the two. So it's in my observation of seeing business mentors, they have much more of a challenge of perhaps at one point being in that open brainstorming place where you can just let it be very grey,
Yeah.
and then actually, like we all do if we're creating a piece of work and we've got a deadline, you've got to actually make that concrete. And so that's just like an applause for all of those people sitting here. Actually, we've got much more skills at that than we actually think.
Absolutely, and I think much more skills that we're comfortable in the unknown, we're comfortable in change, we're comfortable in with improvisation, of changing direction. You know, all those things are what we do and what we're used to doing, and also the mentees are used to doing. Sometimes they're used to being in a state of learning or investigating or finding out, so it's not frightening for them to shift or change or improvise a little bit or think about something for a bit longer or differently.
I just want to pick up a point that you made, Rachel, was about the mentee being able to articulate that inner voice in some way. And my experience of dancers and dance teachers, wonderful people, but they are often reticent to actually articulate verbally their inner voice. They're performers, they express their inner voice through movement and that sort of thing. So Ginny Bolton actually suggests that before a mentoring meeting takes place, that the mentee should encourage to keep a reflective journal, whereby they're not put on a spot when it comes to the meeting where you say, and how are you, what are your plans for, in the next weeks? But they've actually written down their thoughts and ideas ahead of time so that they don't feel like they're sort of flying by the seat of their pants by having to respond. And dancers and dance teachers are very good at, I will do what you're asking me, even though I'm not quite sure what it is that I'm doing. So this notion of encouraging or suggestion of encouraging mentees to keep a reflective journal, which you as a mentor don't have to look at. You're not going to look at it and mark it and say, is that one? But it is one way of helping the mentee to be able to draw the inner voice from the inside, ready to share with their mentor.
Yeah, and I think in similar ways as well, another thing that I do, it's very similar, is I get the mentee to just drop me an email occasionally, like every month or so, just to keep me in the loop of what's happening and where their thoughts are, so they can write, what they need and what they feel is useful, and just to kind of send that to me as well, so I don't have to kind of respond critically particularly or respond at all. I feel sometimes I just send a little bit, yes, that's great, keep going, just a little bit of encouragement, but to get them to keep trying to articulate actually to themselves where they're at and what they're thinking and how they are shifting. Betsy, go for it.
I have one question and also one thing I'd like to propose, or I'd like to hear about later. My question is, it's funny, I was thinking about this when you were talking, Rachel, and then you kind of almost mentioned it. I agree with you. When I've done formal mentoring, I've tried as best I can to let the mentee lead the process in a way and also find his or her own solutions. But sometimes they ask for advice, and I feel uncomfortable when they ask for advice. And I'm not sure why I feel uncomfortable when they ask for advice, but how do you handle that? How does anybody handle that? Because advice is not so much finding their own solution, but there's a level there somewhere. And I don't quite know what it is.
I think, often, my strategy often is always to even question why they're asking that, actually. Why are you asking that, or what is it? Because I know sometimes, actually I remember years ago when I first met Jane, I almost thought, oh great, I'm going to meet this amazing successful woman who's going to tell me what to do. Of course, that's ridiculous, and now, because there's an aspect of, that you it's easier to be told what to do, isn't it? Often, or to what decision to make, or. But I don't have like a direct answer actually, Betsy. It's so personal, and it's so of the moment and with that person and what the question is and what they're asking.
But I think it goes back to this notion of persistence, because we as mentors are supposedly the more experienced in whatever. So it's think of ourselves when we were being mentored in any situation. We go along with it, and at some point you go, just tell me what I need to do. Please set the goals, tell me, and I'll do it. And particularly for dance teachers, they are very much, have always been led, tell me what to do, what is the right thing to do, and I'll do it. So I think it's really alerting the mentee that it is jolly hard, that they do need to be persistent, but in thinking about themselves. But we as mentors also have to be a little bit tenacious and persistent in not sort of giving in too much. It's a very delicate sort of balance within the relationship.
Can I just say my second thing, please?
Yeah, do it.
And personally, I have mentored formally dancers in transition out of dancing, because I had that experience myself, but also people who want to go into leadership roles. I haven't ever done formal mentoring of dancers and choreographers in research projects over time, although I am now being asked to do so. So later on, if people can talk about that kind of experience and the difference between mentoring somebody in the studio and mentoring somebody in one of those other situations, I would be grateful.
Yeah. I mean, interestingly though, I think in my experiences of mentoring, often it's been a combination of both, where I've met them for lunch and we've had an out of studio session, but then sometimes we've gone into the studio and maybe they've joined a class that I was teaching, or I've done a little bit of one-on-one sharing of physical practice with them a little bit as well. Although I think a couple of mentees have asked me, would I observe their teaching? And I feel like I'm a little bit reserved about doing that, because I feel actually that when they're doing that, it's not almost like a super true representation of how they'd be teaching anyway, because there's this kind of weird feeling for them that they're being observed, almost a bit like tested or auditioned or something like that. But I'm kind of open. If somebody would really, really, really like me to observe them and then give feedback, then of course. But you're just always kind of negotiating what the exchange is, I would say. Yeah.
I had another question here.
It was really more of an observation, really going back to your question, Betsy, of when people ask for advice. I say very much, I find myself saying very much what Rachel said. What do you want to know? What do I have, what does it matter? But if they do insist, I think that what I say is, I can only share with you some of the things that I learned.
Yeah.
And I can tell you from experience that some of the things that I did wrong. I made the wrong choices. But this is what I can share with you, but it's going to be different for you. And I think that's all you can do. I was recently asked to watch somebody I was mentoring, to watch their work, and I said, I am not here to give you choreographic training. Actually, we're talking about you as an individual, as a human being, as a potential leader, not just in dance, because I try to get away from the question of it being advanced leadership, but just being a human being who is able to take hold of their lives, and do something that has significance. I'm not here to actually mentor you and coach you, and I really absolutely refuse to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But then that's, again, that's me.
Yeah.
Suggesting that it's right
Yeah.
for everyone.
I mean, I suppose I'm particularly thick-skinned as well because I've got now, after being in HE for 6 years actually, I'm so used to when students come up to me and say, how do I do it right, or tell me what's the right answer, and I'm like, you tell me, because there isn't one,
But I think
you just get that constantly.
But I think for dance professionals, they've been brought up on, this is how you do it, I will tell you, and you do it, and everything will be fine. And it's not that the dancers or the dance teachers or the choreographers don't have the ability for that introspection. It's that you're putting them in a different country almost that they find uncomfortable. So I think it's giving the mentee confidence or recognition first, this is not going to be a comfortable process, but the confidence to actually just persist in that process, because that's how we as mentors and leaders within our field actually got to where we are. Sorry, shall we go one in it? Yes.
I wondered if you could say a little bit about the idea of the sensitivity of, like as a mentor, to set my own kind of objectives, because we've kind of talked a bit in that metaphor of creating something. And when you're creating something, there comes a point when you sort of are like, oh, that's what it is, and it becomes to have its own life. So within that kind of metaphor with your mentee, there must be, how do you recognize the shift in them that they may not yet have articulated, or maybe they can, but how do you, create, it's interesting to maybe hear how you tackle that.
I mean, with my mentees, often they'd start articulating it verbally, or they write it down. When in our correspondence, that starts to emerge quite clearly, and their ideas change, and they start to speak that change as well a little bit.
I think in terms of in the role of the mentor, this is really to do with the stage, the phase of the reflexive mentor, that one is not only reflecting on the process or what is happening, but one is reflexive of oneself within that process. And just as we would encourage, might encourage a mentee to keep a reflective journal of sorts, I think equally helpful is for the mentor not to write copious notes for accountability or anything like that, but just to, as these thoughts come to mind, just make a little sort of, it doesn't even have to be words, it could be drawings. I mean, visual is just as potent as sort of the written word. And it's part of that reflexive engagement of self as a mentor that opens up the sort of potential to actually being able to see within your mentee that same process happening. So it is quite I think it's a very messy process, and there was a book that says, and this is how to do it, and everything's going to be lovely, fabulous. We wouldn't know, but it is that constant dialogue, changing views, and what works for one will not work for others. So I think that's part of the excitement of being a mentor.